thanks to police inaction, in case you haven't noticed, is like boarded up. So that's more my concern.
Former New York Corrections Officer Ed Gavin schooled Fox News host Tucker Carlson so hard that Tucker kicked him off his show. So I'm going to play for you this interview. It's only about 3 minutes because Tucker cut it short. And you're going to see here what Ed Gavin is saying is really nothing remarkable. It's just basic acknowledging reality. But apparently acknowledging reality is too much for Tucker Carlson's propaganda. Check this out.
Hey, Gavin, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Who's going to become a cop going forward, do you think?
Well, I think people will still become police officers. This really is a learning experience for everyone. Let's face it, what we saw in that video was pure savagery. I mean, the documentary evidence showed the police officer putting his knee on the perpetrator's neck while he was rear cuffed and his stomach was on the ground, causing positional asphyxia. So what I'd like to see, Tucker, is I'd like to see more training for police. I'd like to see the police trained as EMTs, like in the fire department. For example, in the New York City Fire Department, we have firefighters that are EMTs. But who gets to the scene first in most of these situations? It's the police. So in reviewing the tape, what I noticed was that the police officer removed the subject, Mr. Floyd, from his vehicle, and he was able to handcuff him, and then he was able to seat him on the ground, and he was handcuffed. At that point, they should have left him there. You know, there was no reason to move him, and obviously, Mr. Floyd was emotionally disturbed. And at that point, you may want to say, "Hey, Mr. Floyd, let me take your pulse." Things of this nature, and we have to change the way we deal with people. Now, I've used I've used force on literally over 500 people in my 21-year career in the New York City Department of Correction and in the New York City Sheriff's Department. I've never had anybody go unconscious. And, you know, that was clearly an excessive, unjustified use of force. I think the verdict was just. I think we had documentary evidence, we had testimonial evidence, and, you know, it was an open and shut case. But moving forward, what we need to do, in my opinion, is we need to have.
How about enforce the law? Okay, do we need to do that? So hold on, wait. Slow down. Do we enforce the law? Like, let's say people are going through the windows of Macy's and the cops are just standing there. Do they resign?
No,
because obviously their honor's being violated, but they're not doing anything about it. When do they start doing something about it and protecting everyone else, not just George Floyd?
No. I want people to protect. I want the police to protect people. But specifically what we're dealing with a person in custody who was handcuffed and he was subdued.
Right.
At that point, you know, we have to take a different tact. And one of the things I just want to suggest, Tucker,
I'm totally willing to believe that. Yep.
Yeah, the U.S. Department of Justice came out with a position paper on positional asphyxia and sudden death. It was published in 1995 and again in 1998. I think every law enforcement officer should read that. It should be read at roll calls. Because what it does, it talks about the physiology of a struggle. Now, like I said, Mr. Floyd was brought under control. What should have happened at that point is EMS should have been summoned, and he should have been placed in an ambulance. And a supervisor should have been called to the scene. I just think that it was excessive, and it shouldn't happen. And what I'd like to see...
The guy who did it looks like he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So I'm kind of more worried about the rest of the country, which, thanks to police inaction, in case you haven't noticed, is like boarded up. So that's more my concern. But I appreciate you coming on. Ed Gavin, thank you. Nope, done. Thank you.
All right. Tucker Carlson appears to be a bit of a lunatic here. That laugh, that wild, forced laugh out of nowhere really caught me off guard. I don't know what the hell that was about. But I think he was clearly uncomfortable. Maybe that's why that laugh came up there. I laugh sometimes when I'm uncomfortable, but not like that. Now, Ed Gavin, in terms of what he said here, again, very tame. Quote, more training for police as EMTs. Clearly excessive, unjustified use of force by Derek Chauvin. The verdict was justified. These are all very tame, just obvious observations that anybody with a clear head should be able to see themselves, but apparently was too much for Tucker Carlson to handle, because all he does is put out an hour of far right-wing propaganda every single night, often white nationalist propaganda. and he couldn't handle just three minutes of facts. Now, Tucker has done this before in the past. With this interview, he actually didn't air the interview, so as now this wrote back then, this is 2019, I believe. Yep. Watch Fox News host Tucker Carlson called guest Rutger Bregman a tiny-brained moron during an interview. Now this has obtained the full segment with historian Rutger Bregman that Fox News is refusing to air. So I'll link to this below the video if you want to remind yourself of what happened here. But just to give you a quick overview, something that Rutger Bregman said to Tucker before he was kicked off, quote, "I went to Davos to speak truth to power, and I'm doing exactly the same thing right now. You may not like it, but you're a millionaire funded by billionaires, and that's the reason why you're not talking about these issues." Carlson ended the interview by telling Bregman to go F yourself and chose not to air the footage. Soon after the video was leaked, Bregman posted an email from Carlson's staff calling Bregman an asshole on Twitter. So there you go. This is not new for Tucker, but usually he doesn't air the interviews. I'm not sure if this was live or really, I guess Tucker felt like he had this one under control and nothing outrageous here. Or at the very least, Tucker wasn't called, you know, a millionaire funded by billionaires. So he didn't make any claims like that. So I guess they decided to air the interview. But again, this shows you really just how Fox News, at least, I mean, especially in prime time, and especially Tucker Carlson, will not allow just a basic level of acknowledgement of reality. They will not, they are not willing to actually be challenged on any of the BS, any of the propaganda that they put out. You don't see these sorts of interviews on MSNBC, CNN. Now, don't get me wrong, plenty of propaganda coming from CNN and MSNBC, but whether it's their ability to actually vet the people they're interviewing, I think Tucker here was expecting maybe something a little different from this former police officer than what he got, or whether it's just their ability from CNN and MSNBC to actually be willing to have conversations that sometimes make them uncomfortable. MSNBC just had on Noam Chomsky on Mehdi Hasan's show, who I thought Noam Chomsky was blacklisted. So I'm not sure how he was allowed on MSNBC, but they had him on. So occasionally, very occasionally, rarely, they will allow themselves to be challenged. But you see here, when it comes to just how far gone right-wing media is, I think this was a clear example of that.